Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Why Your Employees Keep Breaking Up with You and How to Stop It. My name is Sabina Iyengar, and I'll be your moderator for today. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event. All attendees are in view-only mode. Please submit any questions in the Q&A window at the side of your screen. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. The speakers will address them during the Q&A section of the presentation. We will be live tweeting highlights from this session and pulling questions that you can submit on Twitter. All you have to do is follow @BetterWorks and use the hashtag #BetterWorksThoughtLeaders. We'd love your participation, whether that's tweeting questions for our speaker or your own takes on the topics discussed today. This webinar is recorded and all attendees will receive the replay video. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Jason Lauritsen, CEO and co-founder of Cultveo.
Hey, Sabina, thank you for the intro. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about this topic. And hello to you. Thank you for making time to join me today. I am thrilled to be spending some time with you. My goal is to make this the most valuable hour you spend today, maybe all week, because this is an important topic, right? Big topic. I see you checking in. Thank you for that. I like all over the place. I've seen everything from Texas to Florida to I just saw a Ukraine. That is amazing. Our support and love go to you. Maryland, Alabama, Tennessee, Florida, right? We've got a pretty diverse group. Before I jump into this, I know you're here because obviously this title means that you're probably dealing with some pretty heavy stuff at work. And so I would like you to go to the chat and tell me in one word kind of how you're feeling right now. As of right now today, in one word, how are you feeling? Just want to get a sense for kind of where everybody's at before we kick off today. Stressed, good, frustrated, great, tired, exhausted, nervous, tired, curious, overwhelmed. There's a lot of that I see going by. Frazzled. I can't even read them. They're going by so fast. Defeated, frustrated, heavy. All right. Well, I'm going to try to help. I see this a lot of different things. A few of you on the good side. There's a lot of stress, a lot of a lot of feeling overwhelmed, a lot of frustration. I get that. Well, let me see what I can do about that. Let's see if today will help. And unfortunately, I think first I'm going to ground you in sort of where we are, right? Let's make sure that we feel pretty good about, why maybe we're experiencing what we're experiencing. And before I get into that, I'd like to check in with you, I guess, to just see where your head's at on a couple of things. The narrative about kind of why we're feeling the way we're feeling in terms of employees leaving and it being tough to find employees is, sort of we talk about it as the Great Resignation. And the Great Resignation has been going on. It's driven by kind of these, the number of quits that have been going on. And I've been starting to see a little bit of narrative out there, some media headlines trying to convince us that the Great Resignation is over, right? That we're getting to the end of this. The Great Resignation's over. Perhaps we're moving on. And so I'm curious what you say. Is the Great Resignation over or not? So let me throw this up and see what you think. Simple check-in. What does it feel like to you? Is the Great Resignation over? And this is maybe a loaded question because based on what I just saw in the polling, based on the fact that you showed up to have this conversation today, I'm guessing that overwhelmingly we're going to all kind of land in the same place. And I see the numbers coming in. I'm going to give you a countdown. 3, 2, 1. Here's what you say. No, Great Resignation is not over. You're feeling the pain of it. I think the numbers would back you up. In fact, let's see, how do I get back to my slides? Do I do this? Oh, there I go. Thank you. All right. In fact, the numbers actually suggests that despite those that are maybe hoping that it's over or trying to tell us that it's over, if you look at the quit rate numbers from June in the US, which is the most recent number, it tells us there were 4.2 million people that quit in June in the US. If I go back to June of 2021, when we would sort of say the Great Resignation was at its peak, we were looking at a number of 4.2 million, almost exactly the same. The number, overall number, the distribution of where those quits come from, almost identical a year later from June 2021. So certainly we are not out of the woods on this. And I think that perhaps we still have some work to do, which is why we're here to talk about it. So I have one question, I guess, for you as you think about your workforce today. What percentage would you estimate of your current workforce is actively thinking about or planning leaving in the next year? Just curious. I mean, this is rough estimate. I just threw some numbers up here to see what you think. See what your feeling is about it, kind of what the situation might feel like at your organization. I see some responses coming in because it's one thing for the quit rate in June to be what it is. I think the thing that we're here to talk about and why we're all collected together to have this conversation is because we're worried about what might happen in the next 6 or 12 months. And so let me count you down. 3, 2, 1. Here's what this looks like. So 36% of you say 10%. A fourth of you, 1 in 4, are saying over 30%. And that's a little kind of terrifying. Now, no wonder you're stressed. No wonder you're feeling overwhelmed. There's actually a recent PwC survey, global survey, 55,000 employees around the world, 44 different countries, I think. They actually found in their survey data that 1 in 5, that 20% number, was the number that they found. Out of that 55,000, 1 in 5 employees are actively planning to move jobs, to change jobs in the next year. So we've got work to do. And so the question, I guess, isn't, is it still happening? Because it is. And are people still thinking about leaving? Is it going to go away anytime soon? No. So how do we fix it? Why do our employees keep breaking up with us? And what do we need to do about it? And to break down what I'm going to share with you today, I have to give you a little bit of history about me. I spent almost 3 years of my life working for a company that supported through technology, through an employee survey technology, supported best places to work programs all over the US. We were supporting almost 50 different programs when I was there, which meant we were collecting data from literally hundreds of thousands of employees about their work experience each year. And every year we would take that data and we would do an analysis on it to see what kinds of things were driving employee satisfaction, what kinds of things were the things that were engaging employees and getting them to stay, what kinds of things were the things that best places to work did differently. We'd publish sort of a trends report. What did we find? And what I realized over the 3 years that I was part of this, of creating this report, and then going and looking back of the years that they had done it before I even showed up, was that every year in the top 10 drivers of satisfaction and engagement, there was these same few things that were always on the list. And, there were other things that came and went based on what was going on in the world or the economy or whatever, but there were some things that were always there. And the things that were on the list were things like this, that people want to feel valued at work. That trust is really important. They need to feel trusted. They need to trust the people they work with and their managers and leaders. They need to feel appreciated. They need to feel cared for. And the interesting thing is, when I looked at this, and if you step back and you kind of consider, okay, valued, trusted, appreciated, care, right? Clearly, work is about a whole lot more than a paycheck for employees. In fact, I would argue that work is a relationship for employees, that the employees experience work as a relationship. That may feel a little weird at first, but if you think about, in fact, think about it right now. Bring to mind someone who you have a really close relationship with, maybe, a close friend, or maybe a significant other, or, a close family member. And if I were to ask you, you get this person in mind, if I were to ask you to write down, like when that relationship is healthy, when it's positive, when it's working well, how does it make you feel? What does it do? How would you describe sort of what makes that relationship really strong? The words that you would use would be the same kinds of words that I just had up there: valued, trust, care, appreciation. So work certainly sounds like a relationship from the employee's perspective. That's what they expect. And it's not just any relationship. This is a really important relationship when you consider the amount of time we spend at work, the amount of our identity that is wrapped up in our work, right? It may be one of the most important relationships that we have in our lives, that any employee has in their lives. And I think this begins to explain why we're having such issues and why we've traditionally had such issues engaging people, keeping them engaged, retaining people. And that's because historically, and most organizations to this day, are designed around treating work like a contract to be enforced. Right? They think about work as a contract with the employee. It's sort of, this exchange of, we're going to offer you some money in exchange for your work effort. That is how work was designed in the early days. That's how we still treat it today. And, when you think about most of our modern, even management and HR practices, you can see that most of them are still designed to enforce that work as a relation or work as a contract model. Policy manuals, job descriptions, performance appraisals, performance improvement plans, all of these things. I mean, even some of the ways that we are monitoring now work from home employees all feel very much like enforcing a contract, right? It's designed to make sure you're getting your money's worth out of that employee, that they are living up to their end of the bargain. The problem is that doesn't feel very good. It's not a very good approach to relationship building. I mean, imagine being in a romantic relationship like that, or a marriage, where your partner rarely ever shows you or tells you that or demonstrates that they care about you or love you, but frequently reminds you of how well you are delivering on your obligations to them as a spouse. Right? That is not a recipe for a healthy relationship. That is a recipe for a divorce. And by the way, if I just described your relationship, I apologize. I did not mean to bring up a sore subject. I simply am highlighting that employees are living in a pretty tough situation. And this was tough before the pandemic showed up. And it has gotten tougher now because I think people are saying, I'm over this. I'm not okay with this. And I am going to move on. If you're going to treat me like we're in a contract, I'll go find a better relationship elsewhere. And so what we have to do is we have to be able to move beyond this contractual way of thinking. We have to tear up the contract and realize we are in a relationship with that employee, whether we are showing up that way or not. It's a relationship for the employee. And so if we want our people to stop breaking up with us and moving on, then we got to start doing a much better job of treating work like a relationship, of fostering a healthy relationship with our employees. Now, the good news is, you don't have to start from zero on this, right? There's a lot of work that's been done. PhDs and academics have been studying relationships, healthy, positive relationships for a long time. Psychologists have been doing that work. There's a lot that's been written. There's a lot of models out there. And so what I'm going to share with you today, with the time that we have together, is I'm going to share with you what a model for a healthy relationship looks like, or sort of what the ingredients of a healthy relationship are. And this is a healthy relationship in any context, whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, or a relationship with work. These ingredients are all vital ingredients if you want that relationship to be healthy and strong and positive. So I'm going to walk through 6 elements with you, and I'm going to talk about each of those elements, kind of help you understand what they are, but then pull them into the context of the work relationship, and then give you some tips for, I feel the stress here today. So I'm actually going to even give you some tips for things that you can do individually to help strengthen your own relationship with work. But then that maybe will give you some energy to do the work that you need to do to strengthen the work relationship for all the employees that you support and that count on you. So let's dive in. I'm going to go through all 6. I'm going to do this fairly quickly. And then I'm going to give you a very specific tool that kind of will help across all 6 of these. I think the most effective, simple tool that you can use to build a healthy relationship that kind of brings in all of these elements into sort of one interaction or one tool that you can use. So the first element of a healthy relationship is appreciation. Right? We crave validation and acknowledgement from others. We want to be valued and seen by the people around us. That is a sort of a core human need. And we're not very good at this. We're not very good at this in our personal lives, at least not most of us. There's probably a few that are really good at this, but most of us aren't very good at this. And when we show up at work, we are at best still just as bad as we are. And I think sometimes we even get worse. And this isn't a new headline. You know this. If you have ever read the book, How Full Is Your Bucket? That's a Gallup book that was written 20 years ago, I think now. They wrote that book because in their data set, they had a sampling of employee survey data from a couple million employees around the world. They were finding that less than 1/3 of the employees in there, or actually 2/3, let me put it this way. This is an easier way to say it. 2/3, 67% of the employees in their data set said that they had received 0 moments of positive recognition in the last year at work. Let that hit you for a minute. 2/3 of employees said they had received 0 moments of positive recognition at work in the last year. Now, I'd love to tell you that this has gotten a whole bunch better, but I'm not sure that it really has. This is something that is a big lift. And I think the reasons that it hasn't is sort of tied up again in how we think about work as a contract. Because if you look at this chart, let's say we're going to chart out the performance of your employees on, sort of all your employees. There's your organization or all organizations. What ends up happening is it would distribute kind of like this, a standard distribution. Most people are about average, right in the middle, plus or minus a little bit. There's some employees that are really high performers and some that are really low performers. That's every company everywhere. The problem we have is that our traditional management model tells us that we really should focus our time on 2 groups of people and only 2 groups of people. Right? We need to spend our time. And if I asked you, you know this because we've been training this forever. We see this. This is a holdover of traditional management. We're told high performers get the love. Low performers need the attention to either move up or move out. And so that's where we put our time and attention. And of course, when you look at this curve, you quickly notice big problem. Most of our employees are right in the middle of that curve. They show up to work every day, or they log into their work every day. They do their level best. They meet expectations, which is exactly what they're paid to do. And then they log off and they feel like nobody even noticed that they were there. This day-to-day reality is crushing. I hope that none of you are living through this day-to-day reality. If you've been there, you know how disheartening it is. And even 20 years ago, I think Gallup had the answer in their book, And How Full Is Your Bucket? And go pick up that book, by the way, if you haven't read it. It's a very easy, simple read, and it's got the solution. They go to brain science, and they talk about the fact that our brains interpret something like 20,000 individual moments each day. We can pick up that many moments. Our brains are incredible. And those moments come with some kind of emotional charge often, or they're emotionally either neutral, which is a vast majority of them, they're positive emotionally, or they're negative emotionally, which makes sense. When we have an experience, whatever that is, sitting on this webinar, you're going to have a bunch of moments. And hopefully at the end of the webinar, if you feel positive about this webinar, it's going to be because you had more positive interactions or more positive moments that you perceived than negative emotionally. And what they say is that, the ideal for any experience or a day at work, for you to feel good about an experience, the optimal ratio is 5-to-1, 5 positive moments to 1 negative moment. And I think this really helps illustrate what sort of the playbook or the challenge we have when it comes to appreciation and validation, acknowledgement with people at work. in a relationship is we have to be in the business of creating more positive moments. It's not always about formal recognition. It can be little things. It can be smiling at people, saying hi, checking in with people. If you work in an office together, it can be giving high fives. I remember when I was in an office, one of my last sort of formal jobs, when I still had to go to an office somewhere, one of the most powerful things I could do was just get up and walk around to the people that were on my team and just pop into their office or over their cube and give them a high five. And almost every time I would do that, a smile would break out on their face, and we didn't even have to exchange words. That's all it took. And it was a positive moment. So we have to be in the business of simple positive moments, saying thank you, giving high fives or fist bumps in person or virtually, moments of, hey, I see you. I see what you did there. I notice you. That goes a long way. So that's something we can do as individuals. It's something we can teach managers. It's something we can encourage employees to do. But from an organizational perspective, one of the things that I think is interesting about the power of this, when I was researching great organizations that have been recognized as best places, had great cultures, for my most recent book, Unlocking High Performance, the most common practice that I found across all of the interviews that I did was that they had formally put into meetings something around, the most commonly they would refer to them as shout outs, but it was some kind of recognition process where, as a part of the meeting at the beginning or the end, they would go around and express recognition for other people in the room, other people that were not in the room, but that had an impact on them. And it was an incredibly powerful tool because not only did it improve the amount of appreciation people were feeling, but it modeled it, right? It was a modeling exercise. So those that didn't, maybe it wasn't natural for, didn't know how to do it, didn't have the language, got to see it and feel it and experience it. And there's a whole bunch of science that says that that appreciation and recognition is actually contagious. It's a pro-social behavior. So when somebody recognizes me, I'm more likely then to go recognize someone else or to express appreciation to someone else, to express gratitude towards someone else. So really powerful. Appreciation is an incredibly powerful step. So that's number one. The second element of a healthy relationship is acceptance. And the easiest way to explain this for me is, if I were to ask you to describe to me your best friend, if we sat down over coffee and I said, tell me, who's your best friend in the world? And you told me, and then I said, okay, tell me about this person. Like, what is it about them that makes them your best friend? What do you love most about them? In almost every case, fairly soon into your description of talking about them or why they're your best friend or what you love most about them, you'd say something to the effect of, well, I can really be myself with them, right? They know me for who I really am, right? They've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and they love it all, right? They don't judge me. They don't try to change me. I just get to be who I am. That's what acceptance looks like. And if we are to create a work experience that feels like a really healthy relationship, this is a really important thing to think about. We have to create an experience where people feel as if, they are welcomed, that they belong for who they really are, not who we hope they will become someday or who we wish they were or who we kind of want them to be, but who they really are. And to do this work, I think, requires that we understand that we need to foster and build relationships. We need people to get connected and get to know each other. You can only feel safe showing up when you start to understand and connect to the other people around you. And so a large part, one of the things that became very clear to me about this is, early in my career, I worked at a place that it was a terrible place to work. I mean, my manager was terrible. The owner was not very good at running the company. It was a very dysfunctional job. I didn't get great training. I wasn't super successful at first. I mean, it was a bad place to work overall, a lot of drama. And yet I stayed because the guy that owned the place understood the power of getting people connected. And so we had a ton of opportunity, whether it was lunches or happy hours or social outings or different things, where we spent time together and we got to really know each other. And as we got to really know each other, you bonded, right? You built like some real friendships that felt like what I described earlier, and that made you feel like you belong. And so to understand that was so powerful to me that I actually wrote about this with my friend Joe, one of these people that actually worked at that same place with me. In our first book, Social Gravity, we talked about this idea of overlap. And overlap is what we need in a relationship for us to feel like we really belong, that we're really connected. So if you and I don't know each other, we don't know anything about each other, we don't share anything in common, there's no overlap in our relationship, and therefore we don't feel connected to one another. But if we get to know each other, if we have shared experiences, if we start to realize that we have things in common, or we become more familiar with each other. This was one of the gifts of the pandemic, right? Seeing people talk about being able to see into people's houses so that you can see what's on the wall, and you can see the pets, and you can see the guitar sitting in the back. And it's all these opportunities for connection. That is sort of where the seeds of acceptance get born out. And so I know there's a bigger conversation to be had about inclusion and belonging, but at a very, very cursory level, if we want people to feel more healthy in the relationship with work, we need to help people get to know each other. We need to get to know people better. We need to ask more questions. We need more opportunity for connection. We need to invite more personal into meetings. I know this is another practice that I heard a lot when we did research about what was helping people feel connected during the pandemic. It was like, well, in meetings, we have a question of the day where people share some stuff about themselves that maybe aren't work related, right? So we have to make space for that at work. So that's number 2. Number 3 is communication. I hope I don't have to sort of convince you of the importance of communication in a relationship. But I think there's a layer to communication that is important to understand that I can best highlight through a couple of maybe stories about what happens when communication maybe isn't ideal. And I'd ask if any of you are parents, or you have been parents in the past or whatever, you'll really resonate with this. But I have a 12-year-old, soon to be 13-year-old son, my youngest. And let's just assume, and maybe you've had this experience, let's assume after we get done here, I walk out in I log off, and I notice on my phone, I've got a voicemail from the school. And so I dial into my voicemail, I call up, and on the other end of this voicemail, I hear, Mr. Lauritsen, this is Mr. Rinaldi, the principal at your son's school. I need you to give me a call back right away about your son as soon as possible. Here's my phone number. I look forward to hearing from you. No more context. Now, if that is you, or if you're putting yourself in that position, what do you assume about that phone call? Right? I don't know if you're like me. Probably you're not going like, wow, I bet he did something amazing. I bet he's getting an award. Right? I bet you don't go there. We know that when we get that phone call, one of a couple of things happened. I see the reaction in the chat. He's either sick, he's hurt, or he's in trouble. One of 3 bad things have happened. That's where our brain goes. That's what we assume. Maybe if you don't have kids, let me give you another example. Have you ever gotten an email like that from your boss? Like, I need to see you in my office before the end of the day, or I need you to call me before you log off for the day today, with no other context. Has anybody ever got that one? I bet you have. I know I have. What do you assume when you get that? You assume you're getting a raise? You assume you're getting a promotion? Probably not, right? We assume that we are in trouble. We start racking our brains like, what did we do wrong? And here is the truth about human nature. When in doubt, we assume the worst. That's what our brains do. It flows from our survival instincts, right? It's a pretty good survival instinct if you are out in the wilderness trying to survive, and you're wandering around as it's getting dark in the woods, and you hear something you can't identify. Probably a good idea to assume that might be danger and get yourself to safety. The problem is our brain doesn't differentiate between the noise in the woods and an email with no context, right? Danger, 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 get to safety. This is problematic, right? Because think about the amount of change that's going on in your organization right now. Think about the amount of uncertainty that is existing in your organization right now around everything, around the economy, around what's going to happen with COVID, around Where and how are we going to work in the future? Around how am I doing? All of these things, right? When you think about the amount of uncertainty that exists, it's problematic. The bottom line is, because we assume the worst, uncertainty can kill relationships. Uncertainty will kill relationships. You show me a healthy relationship, and I will show you a relationship that has a whole lot of clarity. If they're clear about how, the health of the relationship, they're clear about how they're going to communicate, they're clear about how they deal with conflict, they're clear about how they're going to handle anything, right? There's clarity. Uncertainty kills relationships, and this is problematic because there's a ton of opportunity for uncertainty, like I was just mentioning. Right? Think about all the questions that you have as an employee, and think about all the questions that all your employees have, and anytime it's unclear what the answer is, we don't write a best case. We don't assume the best, right? We write a worst case scenario. And so the key here when we talk about communication is that understanding that communication, for purposes of building healthy relationships, has the goal of reducing uncertainty and creating greater clarity. So if you think about it, we oftentimes we think about communication, we think about pushing information out or we think about intranets, or we think about all these different things. And those are all tools of communication. The purpose, though, of communication should be, how do we reduce uncertainty? How do we create greater clarity for our employees about all of the aspects of their experience? And how do we create a mechanism so that if they are not clear, they know how to get clarity? Uncertainty is really, really dangerous. And so couple suggestions around this. Number one is just for you to be grounded in, when you think about communication at work, when you think about employees, if just constantly be challenging yourself with this question: how can I reduce the amount of uncertainty that my employees are dealing with today? Like, what could we do to create greater clarity? How can we get to greater clarity? As an individual, one of the things I can say that will help set you free a little bit from some drama at work is to learn to assume positive intent, right? So if we know that our brains are hardwired to respond to uncertainty with writing bad stories, then we can interrupt that cycle. So when your email comes in from your boss, you can say, she's probably just busy, didn't have time. I don't know what it's about. Sure, I'll make time for that meeting, right? Diffuses the story, diffuses the drama, diffuses the emotional hit that would interfere with that relationship. And the other thing is, if you don't know what it's about, then ask, right? And this is something you can teach your teams to do. It's something you can practice and model. It's something you can encourage others to do. And the other thing around communication is, if you are not requiring managers to spend one-on-one time with their people with some regularity, like at least monthly, then I guarantee you communication is not where it should be. I guarantee you that the relationship that they have with employees is not where it should be. One-on-one communication is the tool of relationship building. And so that has to be a requirement. All right. So that's 3. Number 4 is support. And I think, support is, we all understand this because we've been on the good side of feeling supported at work, and we've been on the bad side of feeling unsupported at work. And so the difference is pretty stark. When we feel like we have support in a relationship of any kind, that feels good. When we feel unsupported, that's when we break up. That's when we leave, right? The lack of support is a pretty big signal that a relationship is on the rocks. And I love to share a quick story that a friend of mine shared with me many years ago, that I think plays this out. He had just joined a cable company as a cable installer. So, he would go and install cable in houses. And boy, this story is getting dated more every time I say cable. Right now, it's like, cable. Who does cable? We all have streaming. You still have to get cable for your internet. At least we do. But he was a cable installer, and so he had been through his training, and it was his first day being out on his own. And so he had a pretty decent day. He showed up to his last call. He got into it. It was more complicated than what he expected it. So he's up in the attic trying to figure it out, and he's stuck, and he's watching the clock, and the clock is running short, and he's supposed to be picking up his daughter. This was his day to pick up his daughter from daycare. And of course, any of you that have been on the other side of daycare, you do not want to be late to pick up your kids for a lot of reasons. The daycare will shame you and they charge you money and your kids feel abandoned. It's bad. And so he's starting to panic a little bit that he might not be able to get done. And so he calls the guy who is his trainer and says, hey, I'm really struggling with this. And he tells him what's going on. The guy tries to help him, kind of tells him what he should do over the phone. And so he said, okay, I think I got it. He goes back to work, but clearly he's still struggling and he's having trouble figuring it out. And he's really starting to panic. And then he hears something outside. He starts to hear kind of a commotion outside. And he goes to the window and he looks out, and there are 3 cable trucks that had all just pulled up in front of the house. And he said that the feeling of relief that came over him, the feeling of sort of just like, okay, it's going to be okay, that came over him was overwhelming. And he said what he found out had happened is the guy, his trainer, had put out on the radio a call that if anybody was close by, he had a guy that was on his first day, was struggling with this call and needed some help. And 3 people showed up to help. And he said, I mean, that locked in his loyalty, and he stayed there for many years doing that job. And part of that was because of their commitment to support one another. And so that's what support looks like. And I think oftentimes we overestimate how supportive we are. Like, we want to say that we're supportive, but we don't. I don't think we always show up that way. A lot of times when we have an employee at work that's struggling, like my friend, right, we go to judgment. Like, why doesn't he know this? Like, he went through training. Why is this so hard, right? It's about judging the employee. It's about assuming that it's something they're doing wrong, or what's wrong with them, what's broken with them that we need to fix. And when we can diffuse that, like, obviously my friend wanted to do a good job. I don't think you show me an employee, I'll show you someone who, given the means and opportunity, will choose to succeed every single time. And so our judgment doesn't help ever. So get rid of the judgment, think help. When someone is struggling, that's a cry for help. And so number 1, judge less, help more. Number 2, we got to make it easy for employees to raise the flag when they're struggling. Make it safe. If I'm struggling, I need to be able to say, hey, I'm struggling, I need help, and have someone come help me. That's what support looks like. And so we need support. Number 5 is commitment. Any healthy relationship obviously is built on strong commitment. And commitment in relationship actually exists on 2 levels. One is reciprocity. And reciprocity is a fancy word for we are committed to one another, that it goes both directions. We both want each other to be happy and successful and thriving, and that we're willing to invest of that in each other. But reciprocity also requires shared accountability, right? If I'm committed to you and your happiness, that means I need to understand what you expect, what you need, and be committed to trying to live up to those expectations, to being what you need. It's got to go both directions. A lot of organizations, I think we do a pretty good job of making sure employees understand what we expect of them, but I don't think it's always so clear what they should expect of us and how they should hold us accountable. The way they hold us accountable, they leave, right? We need to find a better way. And that brings me to the second piece, which is repair, right? Repair is an important part of commitment, because repair is having sort of a mechanism or a way to fix when things go wrong. And things go wrong in any relationship, no matter how healthy it is or happy it is, whether this is, marriage or at work or any place else. It is important that we have a mechanism for repair. And I think I learned this probably most clearly with my oldest son when he was a teenager. First child I had hit teens. I don't know that I was prepared for the sort of degree of stupidity that it sort of pops into the brain when you hit teenage years. It happens to all of us, right? Our capacity for stupid goes way up. And he had done a lot of really dumb things and made a lot of really poor choices. And I had sort of come to expect this from him. And I was getting a little frustrated, I think. Not my greatest parenting moment. But there was a day I remember when something had happened. I don't even remember what had happened, but I remember something had happened and I freaked out. Like immediately. Something happened. I assumed he had done something stupid. I overreacted pretty soon. I'm on him. I'm raising my voice. He's trying to defend himself, which is making me more irritated. I'm like, just go to your room. We'll talk about it later. So he leaves. Then I come to find out like 10 minutes later that he didn't have anything to do with what had happened. Nothing. And I had a choice to make. Right? I could try to find a way to justify my reaction, right? To make it okay. And there's a lot of things I could do in my head to justify my reaction, or I could prioritize the relationship. I could try to repair the damage that I had just done. And that's what I chose to do. I went down and I apologized. I said, I'm really sorry. I overreacted. You deserve better than that, right? I shouldn't have done any of that. And I'm going to do better in the future. And he forgave me, and off we went. And that happened a few more times. I wish I could tell you it only happened once. I'm a slow learner. But I apologized when it happened. And what happened is then he learned that from me. So when he freaked out at me, which happened with some frequency, he would come and apologize to me later. And it allowed us to navigate through teenage years and arrive at a place when he got to adulthood where we still liked each other. We still had a relationship. And so repair is so important. And I think having a mechanism in place for that is so important. So when we think about commitment in any relationship, and particularly at work, if we're in a committed relationship, we have to get to that repair piece quickly. Apologize, forgive, move forward. Right. And I know somebody's going to come up with an exception of what about the person that is an a-hole that, always is violating the commitment or whatever. That's a whole different thing. I'm talking about when you are invested in building commitment, especially as a manager with employees or as a leader with employees, you've got to be committed to them, and you go first, right? When you mess up, apologize and then forgive. If an employee messes up, forgive, move on, go quickly. And structurally, if you want to foster commitment and make work feel more like a relationship, think about how to use more team-based goals and objectives. Because oftentimes individual goals pit employees against one another, or they feel isolated. So there's less incentive to be committed to one another. And even as a manager, it sort of splits you up. But when you have a team-based goal, then people start to feel like, okay, well, we maybe have this difference, but we've got this thing in common that we need to do together. And so it sort of naturally creates shared accountability, shared commitment. So that is commitment. And then I have one more for you. And the sixth element might be the most important. And this one is time. And this one may seem obvious. I know it seems obvious to me now, but it was my daughter actually who taught me this. When she was 7 years old. 7 years old. I was working on a presentation or writing a blog post or something. I was kind of thinking about what role does love play at work, right? What does that look like? I was exploring that, and my daughter happened to be walking through the living room or by me on the hallway, and I said, I'm like, hey Bailey, I said, come here. I'm like, how do you know if someone loves you? It's the question I asked her, and she stopped and she kind of like, little 7-year-old wheels turned in her head. And then she said two things to me. She said, one, first thing she said was, they give me lots of hugs and kisses, which is a great thing for a 7-year-old to say to her dad. That is not HR advice. I urge you, if you wrote that down, scratch that off. That is not the advice I'm putting forward today, and that's not the lesson. It's the second thing she said that floored me. To this day, I still will never forget these words. She said to me, they spend time with me. That simple. They spend time with me. How does a 7-year-old know if someone loves them? Because they will take their most precious and limited commodity they have, time. Everyone has the same amount of time. They will take some of that precious commodity and they will invest it in me. At 7 years old, we know that is amazing. When you spend time with me, that's what really matters. And that is true at work. That is true everywhere in our lives. You want to know what somebody values? Look at how they spend their time. You don't want to know what people they care about? Look at who they spend time with. Right? Time is the currency of relationships. And so we have to be prioritizing and thinking about how we spend our time. So if you want to hack for how to make your job experience better, how to have a better relationship with work generally, think about how you spend your time. Put more time into connecting with people. Think about where you are investing your time, how you're investing your time. Organizationally, if you want work to feel more like a relationship, and this is more important now than ever before, as we're in hybrid and distributed work, we have to create space for connecting. As we talk about the dissolution of the office or the office being a relic of the past, do not confuse that with a signal that being together in person, face to face, to build and foster relationship and connection is not vitally important, because it is. We don't have to do it every day. We don't have to do it in an office, but creating time for connection is important. Does it have to be face to face? No. That's really powerful. It can also be virtually. It can also be over phone. It can be in a lot of ways, but we have to create space for people to connect. And it has to be a priority. Connection is the work. If we want to keep people, if we want people to stop breaking up with us and going in search of better relationships, then we have got to make connection part of the work. And so this is what it looks like. So there it is. There's your model of a healthy relationship. You pull that into work, design that into work. Think about this through the lens of what you do in your role in HR, how you think about developing managers, how you think about the culture you create, how you think about the tools that you select. But this is the model. And here's the bonus. The awesome part of this is that this works in personal relationships too. You want to improve your marriage. You want to improve your relationship with your kids, your friends. Same six elements. So let me give you now one more, the super tool. I'm going to give you the super tool that you can use, you can teach, and you can take it back immediately, and that is the check-in conversation. There is singularly not a more important tool in the toolbox than a well-executed check-in conversation. Whether that's a manager with an employee, or whether that's you with an employee, or an employee with an employee, or a friend with a friend, or whatever, a well-executed check-in conversation is how you have the conversation that matters with the people that matter. And there is nothing more important than that. And so let's talk about how to do that correctly. And it's very simple, 4 steps. Number 1, a great check-in, an effective check-in conversation always starts with a great question. And there are a lot of different great questions you can ask. You can reach out to me. I'll share a whole bunch of them with you. You'll find a bunch, but a great question elicits a meaningful response, something you can do something with. We do this wrong all the time. What's the most common question we ask when we do a check-in? How are you? What do people say? Fine, good, busy, tired, right? Nothing. My son, his favorite is decent. Decent tells me nothing. But here, what about this? You take a great question, slight modification. It's my favorite tool. I'm going to give it to you today. Some of you may have heard me share this before. Take how are you and add this. On how are you on a scale from 1 to 10? So right now, go to the chat, please, and tell me, how are you right now in this moment, scale from 1 to 10? 10 being couldn't be better, 1 being couldn't be worse. Doing this at great risk to myself. I'm assuming that you are bringing a lot of this with you. Now, I see a whole bunch of numbers flying by me. And there's some real honesty in here going on. And here's the magic of this question, right? You start with a great question. You see these numbers flying by. You're all watching these numbers. It's not just about the great question. Second step of an effective check-in is then you have to ask the follow-up. The reason the 1 to 10 scale is so powerful is that you get some real information. You get some real detail. So rather than getting fine, I get 7 or 2. I saw a bunch of zeros go by. Right? You have to ask the follow-up. Well, what does that mean? Well, the beauty of the number is it tells you what kind of follow-up. It opens you up into a conversation. And so apparently I thought I put this in here, but the follow-up is going to look different based on where you're at. So the people that, like I see Tammy right there, was at an 8 or a 9. Well, somebody that's at an 8 or a 9, they're in a pretty good spot. That's an opportunity to ask them, like, so what's going well? That sounds amazing. Ask the follow-up. That's connection. You celebrate what's going well. You learn about them, right? That's a great opportunity. If they are on the lower end, if they're, the people that shared a 0, right? That's a cry for help, right? That is an opportunity to demonstrate compassion. Like, I am struggling. I need help. I'm struggling. And so that's what you do. You step in. What's going on? How can I help? What can you share? What do you need? Right? That's a call out. In the middle, they're kind of my favorite. And you can use that 1 to 10 scale, by the way. Add that on to virtually any question. You're going to get a more interesting response. So, I mean, my favorite example was it's actually this summer. I was having dinner with my daughter. She was about to go into high school. She started high school here a couple of weeks ago. And I asked her, I said, how are you feeling about high school? And I violated my own rules here. She's like, yeah, I feel okay. Feel pretty good, I guess. And I'm like, well, on a scale from 1 to 10, how are you feeling? And she's like, yeah, probably a 7. I said, okay, well, that's overall pretty good. What are you excited about? And then she shared a couple things that she's excited about for high school, and that's great. We kind of talked about that and built that as a foundation of stuff to feel good about. And I said, well, what's the gap between 7 and 10? What would make it a 10? Like, what would need? And she's like, well, I'm a little nervous about, because there's multiple middle schools that all filter into the same high school. And she's like, I'm a little nervous about all these new kids that I don't know and I don't have any interaction with, and I don't know how that's going to go. And so we talked through that, and we were able to I was kind of able to help her maybe rethink or reframe that a little bit so that she moved her number even a little closer, I think, to 10. And so by the time she started high school, she was feeling pretty confident. That's the magic of this, is that it opens up that conversation. Add it on to whatever you want. Somebody said there's a lot of questions. I used to open every one-on-one meeting I had with direct reports with the question, what is the most important thing we need to talk about today? One question. And there was a lot of one-on-one meetings go 90 minutes long, and we never got past that question. But you know what? That was the conversation we needed to have that day. So every check-in starts with a great conversation. You ask the follow-up, you get into it, you learn more, you really listen, not just to what they're saying, but what they're not saying, so that you can really pick up on where they are. And then you offer support and encouragement. It's that simple, so simple, yet so powerful. And if we would just learn how to do this effectively, I think it's a game changer. It's a game changer for us individually in relationships. It's a game changer at work, right? When we teach managers and leaders how to do this at work, just this simple thing, it can help them start to build this relationship. It helps them start to identify and more quickly get to the things that actually matter, that really matter, so that then they can start addressing those issues that really matter. I think so often we're trying to solve problems and we're not even sure what the problem is or why we're trying to solve it. Whereas if that manager can have the conversation that matters with that employee and get to the issue that's the real issue, and then start making some progress on that issue, we're going to keep a lot more people. And they're going to be loyal, and they're going to want to perform better for us. So we need to teach people how to check in. 4 steps, simple steps, but great question. Focus on great question, and the rest kind of plays out from there. Woo! So that was a lot of content in a hurry. Thank you for the amazing interaction and feedback in the chat. I haven't gotten to read hardly any of this. But remember, work is a relationship for the employee. If you want people to stop breaking up with your organization, with your team, then start treating the work like a relationship. Right? The days of treating it like a contract are over and gone. That worked for a while. It is not going to work anymore. Our employees are saying, I demand more. I demand better. And if you're not going to treat me better, I will go find somebody that will. Treat work like a relationship. You will transform your organization. So with that, I'm going to stop. Here's my contact information. If you would like to get in touch with me, I am grateful that you were here today and spent some time with me. I hope that there's some nuggets you can take back. If you would like to talk more or learn more about how I help you or organizations and managers learn how to do this kind of stuff, feel free to reach out and ping me. Thank you so much to BetterWorks for hosting this and giving me this opportunity. So we have a couple minutes. We can take a few questions if we have any. So I will just be quiet and pause here for a minute.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, we have a couple of questions for you. Can we get your great question list?
Yeah, I have a few. I'll have to think. I think I actually created a, I need to probably update it, but yeah, reach out to me. If you hit me up, I will point you towards some great resources. So either connect to me on LinkedIn and send me a request for that, or jason@jasonlauritsen.com. Reach out and hit me. I'm sure probably BetterWorks probably has a ton of resources for you as well. The key is, like I said, any question that elicits a response that can allow you to dive deeper into understanding what that employee needs or what they're motivated by. That's a good question.
Excellent. Can you give examples of how to make it easy for employees to ask for help? What tools would you implement for this?
Well, I think one of the things that I have seen done with great, I mean, let me back. I'll answer that two ways. One is, one of the most important things you have to do is establish kind of an expectation or an environment where when someone raises their hand and asks for help, that you sort of celebrate that, right? So as a manager or as a coworker, when somebody says, "Hey, I'm struggling with this," you're like, "Oh, thank you so much for raising that. I'm sure that we can help." But you make it almost like we celebrate when somebody says, "I'm struggling and I need help," because that saves time and it's more efficient actually overall when somebody does that, as opposed to just sort of gutting it out. But in terms of specific mechanisms, I think, again, regular team meetings and stand-ups, I've seen this done all the time. Like, they'll have a sort of just a function is like, does anybody have a request for support or request for help? Something that they're stuck with that somebody could help with. And they'll just create space and somebody can say, "Hey, yeah, like I'm really wrestling with this thing and I can't figure it out. Can anybody help?" And then somebody else will reach out like, "Yep, I got you. We'll connect afterwards." It's like that long. So I think that's one way. If you have tools, if you have tools, internal tools or communication tools, maybe you have a channel, whether it's Slack or other tools, where you can sort of have a channel where people can sort of say, "Hey, I'm struggling with this. Can anybody help me with a resource," or whatever. So it's really making it easy to ask, but then supporting and celebrating when people do ask, and making sure, having somebody paying attention. If you do create a channel like that, make sure you have somebody who's paying attention to it, that's kind of facilitating visibility around it. Because the worst thing you can do is create a channel, people put in ask for help, and then nothing happens, right? I'm screaming into the void. So don't make that mistake.
Awesome. Well, we are at the top of the hour. So on behalf of BetterWorks and our presenters, we would like to thank you for attending today's webinar, Why Your Employees Keep Breaking Up With You and How to Stop It. You will all receive a copy of this recording. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.